When Ethan Walker returned to Amarillo after 12 long years, he thought he had lost everything: his job, his savings, even his sense of purpose. All he had left was an old pickup, a loyal German shepherd named Ranger, and a piece of land his father once called the heart of their family. But under that land, beneath boards worn smooth by decades, waited a message his father left behind. A message that would reopen old wounds, reveal a betrayal he never expected, and uncover a fortune buried deeper than grief. Stay with this story. It might remind you of the things we lose, and the things worth coming home to. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The summer heat in Amarillo pressed down like a heavy hand, turning every mile of Highway 87 into a wavering mirage as the old pickup crawled toward the town Ethan Walker once called home. The truck rattled with each bump, tired shocks groaning under the afternoon sun, and Ethan felt every tremor in his bones as if the road itself were testing the last pieces of him still holding together. He gripped the wheel with hands roughened by decades of work and war, knuckles pale from tension, jaw set in the determined line of a man trying to outrun the disappointments behind him. Beside him sat Ranger, the 7-year-old German shepherd who had become the closest thing Ethan had to family. Ranger was a large dog with a strong black saddle across his back and copper-tan legs, a handsome creature with an intelligent gaze, and a muzzle just beginning to show the gray of maturity. Ranger's temperament was steady and deeply loyal, shaped by the quiet years spent at Ethan's side, and the dog watched the passing fields with the attentive calm of one who understood his companion's burdens better than words ever could. Ethan, now 55, had the look of a man built from wind and grit. He was tall, lean, but muscular, shoulders still broad from years of military service, though a slight slump had crept into his posture in recent years. His face was angular and sun-weathered, carved with deep lines earned through deployments, night shifts, and too many years of carrying the weight of others. His short brown hair, brushed to one side, carried streaks of gray that caught the light, and a faint scar on his left jawline served as an unspoken reminder of a desert patrol gone wrong. A moment that had shaped the way he distrusted sudden silence even now. His voice, when he finally spoke inside the cab, was low and tired. "Almost home, boy." It was not excitement he felt, nor nostalgia. It was something much heavier, a knot of regret that had been tightening for 12 long years. The loss of his last security job had come only a week earlier, and the manager's apologetic shrug still stung. "Budget cuts, Ethan," the man had said, not meeting his eyes. Nothing personal, but everything felt personal when it came on top of mounting bills, when the bank card was nearly empty, and when the truck's brakes squealed with every press of his foot. Returning to Amarillo wasn't a choice as much as the final direction gravity had pushed him. His parents' old property, 30 acres of dry Texas soil and a weathered wooden home, was the only thing left in his name. He hadn't visited since the day he left for the army, young and stubborn, believing distance could solve everything that felt tight and suffocating at 18. His father, Thomas Walker, had been a stern but quietly protective man, broad-shouldered and steady-spoken, while his mother, Helen, had been softness wrapped in courage. Both were gone now. The house had sat empty except for memories Ethan wasn't sure he was ready to face. As the truck turned down the long dirt driveway, the old house emerged in the shimmering heat. Single story, sun-faded, with a porch that sagged slightly as though sighing with age. The sight tugged something deep and complicated inside Ethan's chest. Ranger stepped forward, nose against the glass, recognizing the shift in his companion's breathing. Ethan parked beside the leaning porch and stepped out into the heat. The boards creaked under his boots as he climbed the steps, and he felt a familiar unease stirring beneath the surface, like returning to a chapter he had tried to skip. When he opened the front door, stale air and dust greeted him, along with the faint scent of old wood that had seeped into every board over the decades. Inside, the sunlight filtered in through crooked blinds, catching in suspended motes of dust that drifted like slow-moving ghosts. Ethan walked through the small living room, past the stone fireplace where old afternoons once glowed with warmth and safety. Ranger padded behind him, paws soft on the floorboards, nose twitching as he inspected forgotten corners. Ethan paused at the edge of the room, senses sharpening with a sudden certainty that something felt different. Not dangerous, just off. A subtle shift in the air, a slight irregularity in the way the rug lay on the floor. He stepped closer, kneeling despite the ache in his knees, and lifted the corner. A slip of yellowed paper was tucked beneath it, visible only now after years of waiting. The handwriting was his father's, distinctive, firm, unmistakable. Ethan's breath caught. His father had been gone for years, yet here was a message he had never seen, placed with intention, waiting for a moment exactly like this. He unfolded the paper slowly, hands steady but heart racing with something he could not name. The note was short, as if his father had written it with little time or with the weight of something urgent pressing on him. If you're reading this, look beneath the West Horse stall floor. Ethan stared at the words, a chill sliding through him, despite the oppressive heat of the evening. Ranger tilted his head, watching Ethan's expression shift from confusion to something darker, something caught between dread and an old longing that hurt to feel. 12 years away, and now the house was offering him secrets. But it was the signature at the bottom that unsettled him most. Dad. Ethan stood slowly, note clenched in his hand, and felt the first turn of a wheel he hadn't realized had been set in motion. Something had waited for him, something buried, something his father had not trusted to speak aloud. He exhaled, long and unsteady. Ranger stepped closer, leaning against his leg. And Ethan realized, with a tightening in his chest, that whatever lay beneath that stall would change everything he thought he knew about his father, and about the home he had abandoned. The sun dipped lower outside, shadows stretching across the floor, as if urging him toward the truth waiting beneath the west stall. He wasn't ready, but he knew he had to look. The light outside had softened into a warm, late-afternoon glow by the time Ethan Walker stepped off the porch and made his way across the dry Texas soil toward the western horse stall. The air carried the dusty scent of sun-baked timber and brittle grass, a smell that stirred memories he wasn't ready to confront. Ranger trotted ahead with purposeful energy, ears pricked forward, tail flicking with alertness. The German shepherd's gait remained steady and powerful, the gait of a dog who trusted instinct over hesitation. Ethan wished he could tap into that same confidence now. The old horse stall looked smaller than he remembered, its wooden beams warped by time and heat. The roof sagged slightly, and patches of sunlight filtered through the gaps, creating shifting mosaics on the dirt floor. As Ethan approached, Ranger suddenly stiffened and emitted a sharp bark, the kind he used only when something demanded immediate attention. The dog rushed toward a back corner where the floorboards were darker than the rest, paws scraping the ground with insistence. Ethan felt his pulse tighten. Ranger was too calm a dog to react without cause. He stepped inside the stall, boots crunching over scattered hay so dry it felt like paper. Kneeling beside Ranger, Ethan brushed away the loose hay and dust. Beneath it, he found a patch of wooden planking that didn't match the surrounding floor. It was newer, only a couple of decades old at most, while the rest of the stall had clearly aged with the barn itself. Something about it didn't sit right. Ethan ran his calloused fingers along the edges, feeling the subtle shift beneath his hand. The board wobbled faintly. He grabbed the shovel he had brought, its metal head dented from years of use, and wedged it beneath the plank. With a firm push, the board lifted, revealing a layer of soil that looked disturbed in the recent past, not by feet or animals, but by careful, deliberate digging. The soil was loose, darker, like it still remembered the hands that had last shaped it. Ranger whined softly and leaned closer, his nose twitching at the cold trace of metal hidden somewhere beneath the earth. Ethan began to dig, each shovelful sending a thud through the quiet barn. The work was slow, his muscles protesting beneath the heat, but he pressed on. Sweat dripped from his brow, tracing down the lines of age and exhaustion carved across his face. His thoughts circled restlessly as he dug, around his father, around the note he had found, around the strange tug of dread and curiosity that kept him going. The sound of his shovel striking metal brought everything to an abrupt halt. He froze, breath catching. Ranger barked once, sharply, then went still. Ethan knelt and brushed away the loose soil with his hands until the dark outline of a metal box took shape. An old safe, sturdy, black, its paint chipped and scuffed from time. It looked entirely out of place beneath the stall floor, as if it had been hidden during a storm of desperation. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. His father had owned tools, rifles, sentimental keepsakes, but never a safe, at least not one Ethan had ever seen. He wiped dirt from the surface, revealing faint scratches near the lock. At first glance, the marks looked random, but when sunlight caught them at an angle, 3 small characters emerged. 9, 14. 22, crudely etched with what seemed like the tip of a nail. Ethan stared at them, a jolt of unease rippling through him. The combination meant nothing, until a memory surfaced. His father had passed away on September 14th, 22. Ethan's breath faltered. He swallowed hard, throat tightening. That date was carved into his memory with brutal clarity. The drive back from his security job, the phone call from a distant relative named Mark Keller, a soft-spoken, balding man in his late 60s, who had handled the estate's paperwork at the time. Mark had the polite, apologetic manner of someone who was used to delivering bad news. Ethan remembered the man's gentle voice. "Thomas always said you'd come back one day, son. He left things unfinished." That phrasing had haunted Ethan for years, but now it struck him differently. Was this safe one of those unfinished things? He reached out and placed his hand on the safe's cold metal surface. Ranger pressed against his side, steady and warm, as if anchoring him to the moment. Ethan whispered, voice hoarse, "What were you hiding, Dad?" The barn seemed to hold its breath with him. His mind churned with conflicting emotions, regret for not returning sooner, confusion over his father's secrecy, fear of what he might uncover, and the painful hope that the safe might finally explain why Thomas Walker, a man of blunt honesty and straightforward duty, had chosen to hide something underground, like a fugitive burying contraband. Ethan straightened and brushed the dirt from his jeans. The safe sat in the earth like a dark heart waiting to beat again. Dust swirled lazily through beams of light, as if time itself had begun to shift. Ranger nudged the safe with his nose, then looked up at Ethan with eyes that seemed to hold both reassurance and warning. Ethan exhaled slowly. "We're not opening this here, not yet." A shiver, irrational but undeniable, ran down his spine. Something told him that whatever lay inside wasn't just metal and paper. It was something meant for him and only him, something tied to his father's final days. He reached down, slid his arms beneath the safe with effort, and hauled it upward. The weight surprised him. It was far heavier than he expected, the kind of weight that carried history. As Ethan carried the safe out of the stall and into the dying light of evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath him had just shifted, marking the quiet beginning of something far bigger than a metal box buried in dirt. And though he didn't know it yet, the first echo of danger had already begun. The sun was sinking low by the time Ethan Walker carried the heavy safe into the living room, the dying light stretching long shadows across the wooden floorboards. Ranger padded beside him, nails tapping softly against the planks, his muscular frame moving with alert precision. The German shepherd's ears kept flicking toward the door, as if expecting the world to shift again at any moment. Ethan set the safe down beside the worn couch where his father used to nap on summer afternoons. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. Whatever Thomas Walker had buried, whatever urgency had compelled him to carve a date into metal, this was no trivial family keepsake. Ethan retrieved a crowbar from the storage closet, a tool he remembered as a kid, though back then it had felt giant in his small hands. Now, it was barely weight at all. Still, as he wedged it beneath the safe's handle, he felt the strange heaviness of memory settle on his shoulders. Ranger sat beside him, sharp eyes tracking every movement, understanding the tension, even if he didn't understand the reason. The lock gave way with a harsh metallic snap, loud enough to echo through the empty house. Ethan froze for a breath, then lifted the door. Inside was nothing he expected. No cash, no gold, no family documents neatly folded in envelopes. Instead lay 3 items spaced with deliberate care: a rusted ammunition box, dented at the corners, a folded hand-drawn map faded with age, and a leather-bound notebook no larger than Ethan's hand. Ethan lifted the ammunition box first. Rust flaked off beneath his fingers, coating his palm in reddish dust. Inside were only a few discolored, unusable 308 rounds, old, oxidized, and useless. Not weapons, not preparation for danger. A decoy, a warning. The emptiness of the box gnawed at him. Next, he unfolded the map. It was drawn in ink that had softened into a sepia tone. The lines were crude yet purposeful, marked with a few scattered X's and notes written in his father's firm, measured handwriting. Ethan recognized the land, the northern field, the creek crossing, the tree line shaped like a crooked spine. But one X stood out, a point far north, near the old stone ridge where Ethan once played hide-and-seek with childhood friends, before war, and adulthood pulled him away. Ranger nudged the map with his nose, sniffing it curiously, then turned toward the back door. Ethan frowned. "What do you smell, boy?" The dog whined softly and glanced back at the map again. Finally, Ethan picked up the notebook. The leather was cracked and softened with years of handling. It carried the faint scent of oil, dust, and something older, like memories preserved despite time's attempts to erase them. On the cover, stamped faintly in his father's familiar lettering, were the words, "Not for you, but for your future." Ethan's breath hitched. His throat tightened painfully. He sat on the edge of the couch and flipped open the book. His father's handwriting filled each page, small, neat, and precise. But the content, Ethan's pulse quickened as he read. 20 years ago they came again, one entry began. Same offer, same lies. They know something is here. Ethan felt a chill crawl across his skin. Thomas wrote of strangers, men who never gave last names, who showed up every few years asking to buy the land for far more than it was worth. Men who watched the property from the road, men who mailed unsigned letters threatening consequences if Thomas continued to refuse their offers. One page held the shaky confession that made Ethan's chest tighten. "I know something valuable lies under this soil. I can feel it. But they are watching. And a man alone cannot stand against men with money and motive." Ethan closed his eyes. His father had been stubborn, proud, but not fearful. For Thomas Walker to write such words, the threat must have been real. As he continued reading, he found receipts, folded between pages, old invoices from a supply store in Amarillo. One was for a metal detector purchased 12 years ago, another for excavation supplies. But the most important slip was a single scrap of paper with GPS coordinates scrawled in blue ink, coordinates pointing directly to the northern field. Ranger barked suddenly, sharply. Ethan looked up. The dog was facing the north-facing window, body tense, tail straight, ears high. His gaze fixed on the distant fields beyond the fence line, as though he felt something tugging at him. Ethan whispered, "You know something's out there, don't you?" Ranger's only reply was another low growl, not of fear, but of recognition. Ethan set the notebook on his lap and leaned back, trying to make sense of it all. His father had been alone for years. Ethan had been halfway across the world, fighting battles that had nothing to do with the land that raised him. Maybe Thomas had wanted to protect him. Maybe he feared dragging Ethan into something dangerous. Maybe he believed Ethan would understand when the time was right, when life pushed him back home with empty pockets and a tired soul. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting the sting behind his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" he whispered. No answer came, only the creak of the settling house and Ranger's soft pacing near the door. He gathered the journal, map, and ammo box and placed them back into the safe, except for the scrap with coordinates, which he folded and slid into his pocket. The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were holding their breath with him. He stood slowly, the wooden floor groaning beneath his weight. Whatever lay beneath that northern field, it was bigger than old memories, bigger than forgotten inheritance, bigger than the grief he carried. And now that he knew where to look, the next step was inevitable. Ranger pressed close to him, tail still stiff, gaze locked toward the fields. And Ethan understood. The ground itself was calling him. The heat draped over the northern field like a shimmering curtain as Ethan Walker stepped into the tall grass, the late summer sun glazing every surface in molten gold. The air felt thick and unmoving, heavy enough that each breath carried the taste of dust and sunburnt earth. Ranger trotted ahead with steady determination, his powerful frame cutting through the brittle grass, nose lowered, tail stiff with purpose. The German shepherd's coat glimmered under the sunlight, black along the back, copper along the legs, gray beginning to shade the muzzle with the dignified age of 7 years. Ethan followed, boots crunching through dry stalks that snapped underfoot. The coordinates from his father's note led him to a slight depression in the soil, barely noticeable unless one knew exactly where to look. Ranger began pawing at the spot with quick, forceful motions that sent tufts of dust into the sweltering air. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Ranger had reacted the same way earlier that morning in the barn, instinctively, without hesitation. Ethan knelt beside him and brushed away loose dirt. Beneath the top layer of sun-hardened soil lay softer, darker earth just recently disturbed. Ethan began digging, the shovel biting into the ground with a dull thud. Sweat trickled along the sharp lines of his weathered face, catching in the faint scar that crossed his left jawline. The effort of each lift pulled at muscles that had grown used to loss, not labor, but he kept going, driven by the faint tremor of curiosity rising beneath the fatigue. After several minutes, the metal shovel struck something solid. A hollow clang shot up through the handle into his arms. Ethan widened the hole with his hands, peeling soil away until the surface became clear. A rusted steel pipe emerged from the earth, its edges corroded but unmistakably manufactured with intent rather than placed by chance. Ethan ran his fingers along the ridge, feeling the cold bite of metal against the heat of the day. Ranger sniffed around the pipe's opening, ears tilting backward in unease. Ethan leaned in and peered down the shaft. The pipe descended vertically several feet before angling into darkness. The faint smell of damp earth and old machinery wafted upward from within, a strange contrast to the baking heat above ground. Ethan hesitated. The last time he'd climbed into a dark, confined passageway was decades ago, crouched beneath concrete rubble with enemy fire overhead. That memory scraped at him now, tightness in his chest, a lingering instinct telling him to pause. But he pushed past it. Whatever his father had uncovered down there, it was now Ethan's responsibility to face. He lowered himself into the pipe carefully, boots scraping metal, palms bracing against rusted walls. Ranger paced above, barking once in protest, but Ethan murmured, "I'll be back, boy. Stay sharp." His voice sounded quieter than he intended, nearly swallowed by the piping's hollow walls. At the bottom, he entered a compact underground chamber. The low ceiling forced him to stoop. Dust coated everything like time's forgotten skin. Old mining equipment from the 1960s sat arranged in neat formation, as though someone had once worked here with methodical intention. A set of narrow-gauge rails cut across the dirt floor toward a locked metal compartment built directly into the back wall. The machinery looked primitive compared to modern tools: hand-cranked drills, dented buckets, worn picks whose wooden handles had long dried and cracked. Ethan recognized nothing of his father's handiwork in their design, which meant someone had built this before Thomas Walker's time. He approached the locked compartment. The padlock was old but intact, its steel darkened by age. Ethan brushed dust from the surface and noticed faint streaks on the floor, fresh scuff marks not yet settled into the surrounding dirt. Someone had been down here recently. His pulse tightened. When he climbed back up into the daylight, Ranger was circling the area, body tense, ears pinned forward. Ethan followed the dog's gaze and felt a cold ripple crawl under his skin. Footprints, large ones, surrounded the pipe opening, and not just one pair, several. The impressions were deep, heavier than the weight of an average man. The boot soles were broad, industrial patterned, with worn treads that suggested long-distance movement. Ethan crouched and studied them carefully. The footprints were oriented outward, all pointing toward the edge of his land, as if the intruders had stood around the opening for a long time, watching, waiting, before leaving abruptly. A sense of being monitored settled into Ethan's bones. The heat didn't feel like summer anymore, it felt like pressure. As night fell, he returned to the house with Ranger at his heels. Shadows stretched across the yard like silent guards. Ethan unlocked the back door and stepped inside, but something felt wrong immediately. Ranger's growl confirmed it. The air inside smelled disturbed, like hands that didn't belong had moved through it. Ethan reached for the switch. Light spilled across the kitchen, revealing overturned drawers, opened cupboards, scattered belongings across the floor. His breath caught. Someone had broken in. He moved room to room with slow, deliberate surveys, the way military training instilled in him long ago. Ranger walked beside him, hackles raised, movements precise. Ethan found the living room couch cushions slashed open, his father's old radio dismantled, shelves rifled through, but the safe, the one he had opened hours earlier, remained untouched in its corner. They weren't looking for that. They were looking for something else, something his father had hidden deeper. Ethan felt the weight of the notebook in his pocket, the coordinates, the mining chamber, the padlocked compartment, the footprints, and suddenly the air around him felt thinner, as if the house itself were holding back the next secret. Something had been set in motion the moment he lifted that board in the stall, and now whatever force had waited years for Thomas Walker to break had turned its attention to the sun. The last light of day spilled across the Amarillo fields like molten amber as Ethan Walker descended once more into the underground chamber, Ranger's paws padding close behind him. The heat held steady even beneath the earth, wrapping the narrow space in a stifling stillness. Ethan set his flashlight on a rusted beam, its beam slicing through floating dust as he sorted the documents he had taken from the house: his father's map, the notebook, the coordinates, and a set of handwritten notes he hadn't fully deciphered. Ranger lay near the pipe entrance, ears flicking at every distant sound, his sturdy frame resting but unmistakably alert. As Ethan arranged the last of the papers into piles, a soft clump echoed above him. A footstep. Not the sharp, heavy sound from before, the kind that belonged to boots built for intimidation, but something lighter, familiar. Ethan froze, heart tightening, instincts kicking in like a switch. Another step followed, slower this time, cautious. Then a voice drifted down, warm but carrying an undertone of strain. "Ethan, you down there, son?" Relief and confusion collided inside him. "Hank?" he called back. Hank Dawson appeared at the top of the pipe a moment later, leaning forward as the reddish glow of sunset traced the outline of his silhouette. The old man descended with visible effort. Hank was 70, maybe 71 now, a slim but sturdy man with sun-spotted skin and wiry forearms hardened by decades of farm work. His once dark hair had turned fully white, cut short around his ears, and his normally steady blue eyes looked clouded tonight, haunted, Ethan realized, as if carrying a burden he had tried too long to keep hidden. Hank's face was gaunt, the lines around his mouth deeper than Ethan remembered. He wore a faded tan work shirt tucked halfway into dusty denim pants, and his boots, usually polished even on ordinary days, were scuffed as if he had rushed out without a thought. It struck Ethan that Hank had always been the kind of man who took pride in small routines, a cup of black coffee at dawn, the fence inspection at noon, the quiet porch rocking in the evenings, a man of habits and gentle rhythm. But the man standing in front of him now was frayed around the edges, his shoulders tense, his breath uneven. Ethan straightened. "I didn't expect to see you." Hank swallowed hard. His hands, scarred from years of mending wire and lifting feed, trembled as he gripped the pipe's frame. "I know," he said softly, "and you won't like why I'm here." Ranger trotted forward, sniffing Hank's boots, then his hands. The dog didn't bark. Instead he sat, tail low, watching the old man with a calm, almost sympathetic stillness. Hank lowered himself onto a crate, rubbing his forehead. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the distant hum of the evening wind drifted through the steel pipe. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "What's wrong?" Hank's jaw tightened. His gaze lingered on the papers spread across the dirt floor. Thomas Walker's maps, his notes. Ethan's scribbled attempts to piece the puzzle together. When Hank opened his mouth, his voice cracked like something inside him had finally snapped. "I should have told you months ago. Hell, I should have told your father before things ever got this far." Ethan felt his chest tighten, his heartbeat a loud pulse in his ears. "Told me what?" Hank's hands clasped together so tightly the knuckles whitened. "Those men you're scared of, the ones poking around your land, they came to me first." He paused, breath shaky. "And I took their money." Ethan's breath halted halfway in his throat. He stared at Hank, unable to process the words. Ranger's ears twitched at the trembling quiet that followed. Hank continued, each word dragging out as though pulled from a wound. "Your wife, Helen, God rest her soul. She used to say I had a good heart, but good hearts make foolish choices when they're desperate, and I was desperate, Ethan. More desperate than I ever told anyone." His voice grew faint. "My wife, Mary. She got sick real bad 6 months ago. Cancer. We burned through every cent we saved. Then the hospital bills came. Bills I just couldn't pay." Ethan's shoulders eased a fraction, but confusion remained. "So you told them about the—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. Hank nodded slowly. "About this place, about the pipe, the old machinery, everything your father found over the years." Ethan felt something inside him tilt, hurt, disbelief, grief. Hank Dawson had been the man who taught him how to tighten hinges, how to calm a spooked horse, how to tell storms by scent. Hank had been a steady fixture of his childhood, almost a second father after Thomas's sternness pushed Ethan away. But now, the weight of betrayal pressed against his ribs. Hank wiped at his jaw with a shaking hand. "I figured they'd come, take one look, find nothing worth their trouble, and leave. And they did." He looked up, tears gathering. "They told me as much, said the land was just dust and scrap metal, said they were moving on." Ethan felt the sting at the back of his eyes. "But they didn't move on." "No," Hank whispered. "They lied. Or they found something I didn't understand." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And when I saw you digging earlier, saw the safe, saw Ranger kicking up that earth like he smelled ghosts, I knew it. I knew they'd come back for whatever they think is here. He reached slowly into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch, its drawstring worn thin. He placed it on the ground between them. That's everything they gave me. Papers, notes, phone numbers, proof that they've been planning this longer than any of us realized. His eyes met Ethan's with an old, tired sorrow. And I'm sorry, Ethan. God knows I'm sorry. Ethan stared at the pouch. The man he once trusted most had opened the door to their enemy. Yet seated before him was a broken man. Not malicious, just drowning. Ranger pressed his head gently against Hank's knee, sensing the sincerity in the old man's trembling frame. Ethan exhaled slowly. The betrayal was real, but so was the desperation behind it. He looked around the dim chamber, the dying sunlight streaking in through cracks in the pipe. For a moment, everything fell silent again. Heavy. Unavoidable. He understood now. The danger had begun long before he arrived. And the man who had tried to protect him all his life was the same man who had unknowingly led danger to his door. Chapter 6. Redemption and the Inheritance Revealed. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty kitchen windows as Ethan Walker sat at the table. Papers spread before him like fragments of a life he had never known his father lived. The air in the house felt different now. Less abandoned, more watchful, as though the walls themselves were waiting for him to decide what came next. Ranger lay near his feet, the 7-year-old German shepherd stretched across the cool wooden planks, his powerful chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Every now and then, Ranger lifted his head and nudged Ethan's boot, as if reminding him he wasn't going through any of this alone. The documents Hank had returned the night before were spread across the table. Ethan examined each page slowly, methodically. The old mining surveys, the threatening letters, the receipts for equipment Thomas Walker had purchased, and the notes Hank had scribbled in panic months earlier when the strangers first approached him. Ethan tried to read with a level head, but emotion pressed tightly behind every breath. Betrayal, compassion, loss, and something that felt dangerously close to forgiveness, all tangled together. By mid-morning, he gathered the papers carefully into a worn leather folder and drove into town. The Amarillo streets shimmered under the August sun, and the town felt both familiar and foreign, like revisiting an old battlefield after the smoke has cleared. Ranger rode in the passenger seat, posture alert, ears forward, a silent guardian ready to face whatever waited next. The law office of Caroline Myers sat on the corner of an older business strip, its sign modest, its windows shaded against the heat. Ethan pushed the door open, the bell above it chiming softly. Inside, the cool air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and aging legal books. Caroline looked up from her desk as he entered. Caroline Myers was in her mid-40s, tall and striking in a reserved way. Her dark brown hair was pulled back neatly, showing a face sharpened by years of long hours and difficult clients. She had olive-toned skin, expressive eyebrows, and eyes that held a calm, analytical intelligence. She was not someone easily rattled. Ethan had always respected that about her. She was the kind of woman who handled conflict as though it were a problem to be solved, not a storm to survive. But there was also a warmth beneath her professionalism, something shaped, he suspected, by the divorce she'd endured a decade earlier, and the years she'd spent raising her teenage son alone. "Morning, Ethan," she said, standing. "You look like you've been carrying a mountain." He offered a tired nod. "Feels like it." She gestured toward the conference table. "Let's take a look." For the next 2 hours, Ethan laid out everything. His father's journal, the map, the receipts, the strange notes, and finally, Hank's bundle. Caroline reviewed the documents with meticulous care. Her fingers traced lines on the map, her brow tightening as she compared dates, signatures, and mineral claims. Ranger sat beside Ethan, occasionally shifting to put his head in Ethan's lap, still sensing the tension that clung like humidity. When Caroline finally leaned back, she exhaled a long, slow breath, one that carried the weight of confirmation. "Ethan," she said, her voice firm, "your father protected this land for decades. These papers prove the mineral rights belong to your family exclusively. Those men who approached Hank, they were attempting unlawful coercion." Ethan felt something inside him lift, a pressure he hadn't realized was crushing him. Caroline continued, tapping one of the surveys. "With Hank's documents, the timeline becomes undeniable. We can file a petition to secure your inheritance through a court declaration, and I believe we'll win." She didn't smile often, but she did then, a small, encouraging lift of her lips. "You've got a solid case." The petition was filed that afternoon. Over the next 2 weeks, a court-appointed geological team arrived. 3 specialists from Lubbock, including Dr. Wyatt Crane, a lanky man in his 50s with pale blonde eyebrows, sun-damaged skin, and the meticulous demeanor of a scientist who preferred numbers to people. He spoke little, moved with quiet precision, and had a habit of tapping his pen when thinking. Despite his reserved nature, there was a gentleness to him, perhaps shaped by years spent studying landscapes that outlasted human noise. They surveyed the old hook shaft, took core samples, and mapped the underground layers with modern equipment Ethan had never seen before. Ranger followed them everywhere, sniffing tool bags and equipment cases as if making sure the strangers behaved. When the results came back, Caroline called Ethan to her office. He arrived with Ranger at his side. Caroline motioned for him to sit, her expression unreadable until she slid the report toward him. "You should see this." Ethan read slowly, then he stopped breathing. Under Thomas Walker's land lay a substantial vein of rare earth minerals and high-grade tin ore, worth more than $20 million at current market estimates. A fortune buried under the very fields Ethan had once run across as a child. Ethan closed the folder with trembling hands. Money had never been the point. Survival had. Understanding his father had. But the number still shook him. Ranger pressed against his leg, grounding him. There was one last step. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan drove to Hank Dawson's house. The porch rail was rusted now, the paint peeling, the chairs sun-bleached. Hank sat hunched in one of them, his thin frame silhouetted by the fading light. His face looked older than it had weeks ago, guilt carving deeper lines across his already weathered features. Ethan sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time, only the cicadas and the warm wind filled the silence. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "You hurt me, Hank." Hank swallowed hard. "I know, and I'll carry that until I die. But you also helped me see the truth," Ethan said. "I can't forget either one." Hank bowed his head. Tears slipped into his white beard. By the end of summer, the Amarillo court officially declared Ethan the sole legal owner of the land and all its mineral rights. He didn't sell. He refused all offers. Instead, he chose controlled development and committed a portion of future profits to helping neighbors in need, starting with paying the medical bills that had pushed Hank into desperation. That night, Ethan sat on the wooden steps of his porch. Ranger curled beside him, warm and steady. The summer breeze carried the scent of earth, rich, alive, full of promise. Ethan looked at the sky, stars shimmering like silver veins across the darkness, and he felt something settle inside him, a presence, a memory, a quiet blessing. He understood now what his father meant in those final pages. Wealth wasn't the treasure. What Ethan did with it, that was the true inheritance. And for the first time in 12 years, Amarillo felt not like a place he had returned to, but a place he belonged. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't loud or sudden. They don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. Most of the time, they come quietly, through a hand that still helps even after it has failed, through a dog that refuses to leave your side, or through a father's love that keeps guiding you long after he's gone. Ethan's story reminds us that God's work often moves beneath the surface of our lives, buried in places we overlook until the moment we are ready. And when we finally uncover those hidden blessings, we see how every hardship, every setback, every unanswered prayer was shaping us into someone who could carry the gift when the time came. If you've ever felt lost or wondered whether God still sees you, remember this. Grace often waits in the soil beneath your feet. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to dig. Before you leave, share your own story below. Tell us where you're watching from or a moment when you felt God's hand in your life. And if this tale touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel so these stories can continue reaching people who need them. May God bless you, keep you safe, and guide you to whatever hidden treasure He has placed in your path, today and always.